They say legends recognize legends, but sometimes recognition comes with a challenge wrapped in arrogance. Bob Dylan was untouchable in 1967, the voice of a generation, the poet who had transformed folk music into something that could carry the weight of an entire cultural revolution. When he heard about this flashy American guitarist making waves in London with electric pyrotechnics and showmanship, Dylan's response was dismissive. "Electric guitar is easy," he said. "Any fool can make noise with amplification and effects. The real test of a musician is acoustic, just voice and guitar and nothing to hide behind." It was a challenge delivered with the casual confidence of someone who had never been proven wrong about music. But when Jimi Hendrix accepted that challenge on a spring evening in 1967, what happened in the next 20 minutes didn't just humble Bob Dylan. It shattered his understanding of what acoustic guitar could be and left him unable to speak for 3 full minutes after Jimi finished playing. Before we step into that room where 2 titans met and one walked away changed forever, hit subscribe, because what you're about to hear comes from the 5 people who witnessed the moment when Bob Dylan learned that genius comes in forms he had never imagined. Spring 1967. The world is fragmenting and reassembling itself in new configurations. The Vietnam War is escalating. The summer of love is approaching. Young people are questioning everything their parents believed and searching for new ways to understand reality and consciousness and what it means to be alive. Music is the language of this transformation, and Bob Dylan is its prophet. He has already revolutionized folk music by going electric at Newport in 1965, facing down the purists who accused him of betrayal, proving that amplification doesn't diminish authenticity, but can amplify it. His albums Bringing It All Back Home, Highway 61, Revisited, and Blonde on Blonde have redefined what popular music can say and how it can say it. Dylan's lyrics are poetry, his voice is raw truth, and his guitar playing, while not technically virtuosic, serves his songs with perfect economy and emotional directness. He is 26 years old and has already achieved more than most musicians achieve in a lifetime. Bob Dylan's relationship with the guitar is complicated. He came up through the folk tradition where the guitar is an accompaniment to the voice, a rhythmic and harmonic foundation for lyrics that carry the real weight of the song. Dylan's acoustic playing is competent and effective, serving his compositions without calling attention to itself. His electric playing, developed more recently, is raw and aggressive, using distortion and volume to create emotional impact rather than technical display. But Dylan has never claimed to be a guitar virtuoso. His instrument is language. His genius is in words and melodies and the ability to capture something essential about the American experience in 3-minute songs that sound like they've always existed. Still, he has opinions about guitar playing, about what matters and what doesn't, about substance versus style, about authentic expression versus empty showmanship. When word reaches Dylan in early 1967 about Jimi Hendrix, the response is skeptical. The descriptions Dylan hears focus on spectacle, on playing with teeth and behind the back, on setting guitars on fire, on volume and feedback and electronic effects. To Dylan, this sounds like everything he dislikes about the direction rock music is taking. The emphasis on visual performance over musical substance, the use of technology to compensate for lack of genuine talent, the confusion of loudness with power. Someone plays him a recording of the Jimi Hendrix Experience performing Hey Joe. Dylan listens with his characteristic intensity, then delivers his verdict. "It's impressive in its way," he says, "but it's all electric tricks. Take away the amplification and the effects and the volume, and what do you have? The real test of a musician," Dylan says, "is acoustic. Just you and the guitar and the song. That's where you can't hide, where every weakness is exposed, where only genuine talent survives." Someone suggests that maybe Jimi could play acoustic as well as he plays electric. Dylan's response, remembered by multiple people who were present, was dismissive. "Electric is easy," he said. "Anyone can make noise with an amplifier turned up loud enough. Acoustic is where you prove whether you're actually a musician or just a performer." This comment, like most things Bob Dylan says, doesn't stay private. It circulates through the London music scene, reaches people who know Jimi, eventually reaches Jimi himself. The reaction from Jimi's camp is interesting. Chandler, Jimi's manager, sees it as an opportunity. If Jimi can prove himself to Bob Dylan, if he can meet Dylan's challenge and demonstrate that his talent isn't dependent on electric effects, it will legitimize him in ways that spectacular stage performances cannot. Noel Redding and Mitch Mitchell, Jimmy's bandmates, are protective and angry, saying that Dylan doesn't understand what Jimmy is doing, that the electric guitar in Jimmy's hands is a completely new instrument with possibilities that acoustic guitar could never achieve. But Jimmy's response when he hears about Dylan's challenge is characteristically quiet and confident. He says he'd be happy to play acoustic for Bob Dylan, that he has nothing to prove, but he respects Dylan enough to show him what acoustic guitar means to someone who approaches it differently than the folk tradition does. Arrangements are made through mutual acquaintances. A meeting is set up at a small flat in London where several musicians are gathering for an informal evening. The ostensible purpose is just hanging out, listening to music, talking about what's happening in the scene. But everyone who's invited knows the real purpose. Bob Dylan and Jimi Hendrix are going to be in the same room, and at some point, Jimmy is going to play acoustic guitar for Dylan, and Dylan is going to have to confront whether his dismissive assessment of Jimmy's talent was accurate or whether he was judging something he didn't fully understand. The gathering is intentionally kept small. 5 people besides Dylan and Jimmy: Chandler, a journalist named Michael Gray, who will later write extensively about Dylan, 2 session musicians who are friends with both camps, and a sound engineer who brings recording equipment with the idea of documenting whatever happens, though the recordings from this session have never been released and may no longer exist. The evening starts casually. People arrive at different times, bringing wine and cigarettes and the nervous energy of knowing something significant might happen. Dylan arrives early, sitting in a corner with his acoustic guitar, playing quiet runs and fragments of songs, looking relaxed but alert. Jimmy arrives around 8 o'clock with Chandler, carrying a borrowed acoustic guitar, a Martin that belongs to one of the session musicians. The introductions are polite but formal. Dylan and Jimmy shake hands. Dylan says something about having heard a lot about Jimmy's playing. Jimmy says he's been listening to Dylan's records for years, that Highway 61 Revisited changed the way he thought about what songs could do. It's a genuine compliment, not flattery, and Dylan accepts it with a nod. They sit on opposite sides of the room, not performing yet, just part of the gathering, talking with others, feeling out the atmosphere, waiting for the right moment. An hour passes. Wine is consumed. Conversation flows through topics ranging from the state of the London music scene to politics to the nature of creativity, and whether inspiration comes from conscious craft or unconscious channeling of something beyond the self. Dylan participates in these conversations with his characteristic intensity, speaking in riddles and metaphors, questioning assumptions, pushing back against conventional wisdom. Jimmy is quieter, listening more than talking, occasionally offering observations in his soft-spoken way that reveal depths of thought that his flamboyant stage persona conceals. The journalist Michael Gray later wrote that watching Dylan and Jimmy in conversation was like watching 2 people speak different dialects of the same language, both brilliant but approaching intelligence from such different angles that communication required constant translation and interpretation. Around 9:30, someone suggests that people should play something, that the guitars are here, and it seems like a waste to spend the evening just talking. Dylan picks up his acoustic and plays a new song he's been working on, something that will eventually appear on John Wesley Harding but that exists now only in rough form. He plays it straight, no embellishment, letting the lyrics carry the weight. It's classic Dylan, dense with imagery and meaning, the guitar serving the words without calling attention to itself. When he finishes, there's appreciative silence, then comments about the lyrics, questions about what certain lines mean. Dylan deflects the questions, says the song means whatever the listener hears in it, that he's not going to explain something that should be self-evident if you listen properly. It's a response that's quintessentially Dylan, asserting authority while refusing to exercise it directly. After Dylan plays, one of the session musicians plays something, then the other. Both are competent, but clearly operating in Dylan's shadow, playing the kind of folk rock that Dylan has defined and that everyone else is now working within. The playing is good but derivative, lacking the originality that marks genuine innovation. Then attention turns to Jimmy. Someone says, "Come on, man. Let's hear what you've got. Let's see what you do when you can't hide behind Marshall stacks and fuzz pedals." It's said jokingly, but everyone in the room knows this is the moment the evening has been building toward. Jimmy picks up the borrowed Martin, tests the tuning, makes some small adjustments. Dylan is watching carefully now, his body language attentive, his expression neutral, but his eyes sharp. Chandler later testified that you could feel the tension in the room increase. that everyone understood they were about to witness something that would be remembered, though no one knew yet whether it would be triumph or disaster for Jimi. Jimi starts playing. He doesn't announce what he's going to play, doesn't provide context or explanation. He just begins, his fingers finding positions on the fretboard that look strange to the others in the room because Jimi is left-handed, playing a right-handed guitar upside down, the strings reversed so that what looks wrong is actually right for him. The first sounds that come from the guitar are soft, almost tentative, a simple melodic line that could be folk or blues or something else entirely. But within seconds it becomes clear that something unusual is happening. Jimi is playing the acoustic guitar in a way that none of the others have heard before, using techniques that seem impossible on an unplugged instrument. He's creating bass lines and melody lines simultaneously, making one guitar sound like two or three, using his thumb to play rhythm on the low strings while his fingers pick out complex melodies on the high strings. The style is similar to what folk players call Travis picking, but more complex, more fluid, more musical. Michael Gray later wrote that watching Jimi play acoustic was like discovering that an instrument you thought you understood completely was actually only revealing a fraction of its capabilities. The guitar in Jimi's hands becomes something alive, something that breathes and speaks and tells stories without words. He plays for maybe 2 minutes in this fingerstyle approach, establishing that he has complete technical command of acoustic guitar, that the suggestion he can only make noise with electric amplification is absurd. But then he shifts, starts to incorporate elements that seem impossible on acoustic. He's creating sounds that approximate feedback by letting strings ring and vibrate in ways that generate overtones and harmonics. He's using percussive techniques, hitting the body of the guitar to create rhythmic elements that punctuate the melodic lines. He's bending strings in ways that acoustic strings normally don't bend, using strength and technique to pull notes up to pitches that make the guitar sound like it's crying or singing. The song he's playing, if it can be called a song, has no clear structure. It's not blues or folk or rock. It's something else, something that draws from all these traditions but transcends them. Something that feels ancient and futuristic simultaneously. Dylan's expression has changed. The neutral watchfulness has been replaced by something that looks like confusion, mixed with unwilling fascination. He's leaning forward slightly, his own guitar forgotten in his lap, his attention completely focused on what Jimi is doing. The others in the room have stopped their side conversations, stopped drinking, stopped everything except listening. One of the session musicians later said that the sound Jimi was creating had a quality that made it impossible to think about anything else, that it filled your consciousness completely, that you forgot there was a world outside the room because the music was creating its own complete universe. Jimi plays for approximately 15 minutes total, though everyone who was there agrees that time felt distorted, that it could have been 5 minutes or 50, that the normal way of experiencing duration broke down under the intensity of what they were hearing. He moves through different styles and moods, from gentle and melodic to aggressive and percussive, demonstrating not just technical facility but emotional range and compositional sophistication. He quotes briefly from Bob Dylan songs, taking Dylan's own melodies and reinterpreting them through his approach, showing respect while simultaneously demonstrating that there are ways to play this music that Dylan himself has never considered. He incorporates elements of blues and jazz and folk and classical music, not as separate styles, but as different colors in the same painting, creating something unified and coherent despite drawing from such diverse sources. The most striking moment comes near the end when Jimi plays a passage that sounds like two guitars having a conversation, one asking questions and the other answering, both voices coming from the same instrument, both played by the same person. The technical difficulty of what he's doing is obvious even to non-musicians, but what's more impressive is the musicality. The sense that every note serves an emotional or narrative purpose, that nothing is played just to show off, that the complexity exists in service of expression rather than as an end in itself. When Jimi finally resolves the piece and lets the last note fade into silence, no one moves. The room stays silent for what multiple witnesses agree was at least 2 minutes, possibly 3. Not the silence of people who don't know what to say, but the silence of people who need time to process what they've just experienced, to let their understanding of music and guitar and what's possible catch up to what their ears just told them. Bob Dylan breaks the silence. He stands up, sets his own guitar down carefully, walks over to where Jimi is sitting. Jimi looks up, his expression uncertain, waiting for Dylan's response. Dylan opens his mouth as if to speak, then closes it again. He tries again, and again no words come out. The journalist Michael Gray wrote that watching Bob Dylan, the master of language, the poet who always has words for everything, struggle to find any way to articulate what he's feeling was one of the most extraordinary things he'd ever witnessed. Dylan finally manages to say one word: how? Jimi starts to answer, starts to explain about playing left-handed and learning different techniques and listening to different kinds of music, but Dylan waves the explanation away. He says, "No, that's not what I mean," and then he can't seem to finish the thought. He sits back down, picks up his own guitar, looks at it like he's never seen it before, puts it down again. Chandler later recounted that the next 20 minutes were the most awkward and profound he'd ever experienced in the music business. Dylan attempted multiple times to articulate what he was thinking and feeling, but the man who wrote Masters of War and A Hard Rain's A Gonna Fall couldn't find words for what Jimi's playing had revealed to him. He kept starting sentences and not finishing them, making gestures with his hands as if trying to physically shape meaning that language couldn't capture. The others in the room tried to help by offering their own observations, talking about the technical aspects of Jimi's playing, trying to create a framework for discussion. But Dylan kept shaking his head, saying, "No, you don't understand. It's not about technique, it's about something else, something I can't name." Finally, Dylan looks directly at Jimi and delivers what might be the most honest statement he's ever made about another musician. He says, "I thought I understood the guitar. I thought I knew what it could do. I was wrong." It's an extraordinary admission from someone whose confidence in his own musical judgment has rarely wavered. But Dylan continues, his voice strained with the effort of articulating something that resists articulation. He says that listening to Jimi play acoustic made him realize that his entire relationship with the instrument has been limited by assumptions he didn't know he was making, that there are possibilities in 6 strings and a wooden box that he never imagined, that what he thought was mastery of the guitar was actually just familiarity with one narrow approach to it. He says that Jimi's playing didn't just impress him or surprise him, it fundamentally altered his understanding of what music can be and do. Someone asks Dylan if he still thinks electric guitar is just easy noise, if he still believes acoustic is the only real test of musicianship. Dylan's response, remembered by everyone who was there, comes after a long pause. He says that the question reveals how completely he was misunderstanding what Jimi does with electric guitar, that if Jimi can play acoustic like that, then what he does with electric amplification must be equally sophisticated and intentional, that Dylan had been dismissing as noise something that was actually a different language that he didn't speak and couldn't understand. He apologizes to Jimi directly, says he was talking about something he didn't comprehend, says that arrogance about music is a trap he should have been wise enough to avoid. It's a remarkable moment of humility from someone not known for public displays of self-doubt. The gathering continues for another hour, but the dynamic has completely changed. Dylan asks Jimi questions about his approach to the guitar, about where he learned certain techniques, about how he thinks about composition and improvisation. Jimi answers in his quiet way, explaining that he doesn't think of himself as particularly innovative, that he's just trying to make the sounds he hears in his head, that a lot of what he does comes from necessity because he's left-handed in a right-handed world and had to figure out unconventional solutions to standard problems. Dylan listens with the intensity of someone receiving crucial information, occasionally picking up his own guitar and trying to replicate small elements of what Jimi demonstrated, failing, trying again, slowly beginning to understand just how much skill and practice and innate musicality is required to make what Jimi does look effortless. The journalist Michael Gray wrote extensively about this evening in an article published years later after both Dylan and Jimi had achieved iconic status. Gray described the event as one of the most significant musical encounters of the 20th century, comparable to the young Elvis meeting the old blues masters or the Beatles discovering Bob Dylan's lyrics. He wrote that what made the evening extraordinary wasn't just Jimi's playing, which was remarkable, but Dylan's response, his willingness to acknowledge that his dismissive comments came from ignorance, his openness to having his understanding of music fundamentally challenged and changed. Gray argued that this encounter influenced Dylan's subsequent work, that the more experimental and musically adventurous approach Dylan would take on albums like John Wesley Harding and Nashville Skyline showed evidence of having internalized lessons from watching Jimi demonstrate what acoustic guitar could be in the hands of someone who refused to accept conventional limitations. The session musician who owned the Martin guitar that Jimi played that evening later said that after that night, he could never play the instrument the same way again. He said that knowing what the guitar was capable of in Jimi's hands made his own playing feel inadequate and limited. He said he eventually sold the guitar because it had become a reminder of his own limitations rather than a tool for expression. The other session musician present said that watching Dylan's reaction to Jimi was more educational than the playing itself, that seeing someone of Dylan's stature acknowledge the limits of his own understanding was a powerful lesson in humility and openness to learning. He said that Dylan's willingness to be genuinely surprised and changed by encountering genius that operated differently from his own genius was a model for how any artist should approach unfamiliar excellence. The days and weeks following this encounter saw a shift in how Bob Dylan spoke about Jimi Hendrix. Where before he had been dismissive or skeptical, now he was effusive in his praise. He told interviewers that Jimi was doing things with guitar that expanded what the instrument could be, that listening to Jimi made him reconsider his own approach to music. In private conversations with other musicians, Dylan described the acoustic session as a humbling experience, as a reminder that no matter how successful or influential you become, there are always things to learn, always artists who are exploring territories you haven't even imagined exist. Dylan attended several Jimi Hendrix Experience concerts in the following months, standing in the audience or watching from backstage, studying Jimi's technique, trying to understand how someone could be so technically sophisticated while appearing so effortlessly spontaneous. Jimi, characteristically, didn't publicize the encounter or use it for promotional purposes. When asked about meeting Bob Dylan, he would say that Dylan was gracious and open-minded, that they had a good conversation about music, that he respected Dylan's work tremendously. He never mentioned that Dylan had initially dismissed his talent or that the acoustic session had been set up as a response to Dylan's challenge. This discretion and humility in the face of triumph over someone who had doubted him was typical of Jimi's personality. The contrast between his explosive stage presence and his gentle, soft-spoken demeanor offstage. Chandler tried to leverage the encounter for publicity, suggesting to journalists that they write about Dylan's endorsement of Jimi, but Jimi discouraged this, saying he didn't want to build his reputation on someone else's name, that his music should speak for itself. The only recording that exists of this encounter is a tape that the sound engineer made, capturing approximately 10 minutes of Jimi's acoustic playing. This tape has circulated among collectors and bootleggers for decades, but its authenticity has never been officially confirmed and the quality is poor, with significant background noise and distortion. Still, those who have heard it say that even through the technical limitations of the recording, Jimi's playing is remarkable, that you can hear the qualities that left Dylan speechless. The tape has never been officially released, possibly because of legal complications around ownership and permissions, possibly because those who possess it understand that the mythology of the encounter is more powerful than any recording could capture, that some moments in music history should remain stories rather than documents. Bob Dylan's career trajectory after 1967 shows evidence of having absorbed lessons from that spring evening. His guitar playing became more adventurous, more willing to break from folk traditions, more open to incorporating techniques and approaches from other genres. His willingness to collaborate with musicians from different backgrounds increased. His public statements about music became less dogmatic, more open to acknowledging the validity of approaches different from his own. Whether all of this can be attributed directly to the encounter with Jimi is impossible to prove, but those who were present that evening believe that something fundamental shifted in Dylan that night, that having his confident dismissal of electric guitar as easy noise demolished by Jimi's acoustic demonstration taught him a lesson about humility and openness that influenced not just his music, but his entire approach to artistic creation. The story of Bob Dylan challenging Jimi Hendrix to prove himself on acoustic guitar has become part of rock and roll mythology, told and retold in countless variations, often embellished with details that don't match the testimony of those who were actually there. But the core truth remains consistent across all accounts. Bob Dylan, the untouchable poet of his generation, dismissed Jimi Hendrix's talent as dependent on electric amplification, challenged him to play acoustic as the real test of musicianship, and then found himself unable to speak for 3 full minutes after Jimi demonstrated capabilities that shattered Dylan's understanding of what guitar could be. It's a story about hubris and humility, about the danger of dismissing what you don't understand, about genius recognizing genius even when it comes in unexpected forms. And it's a reminder that in music as in life, the moment you think you figured everything out is usually the moment before you discover how much you still have to learn.